Good to see you or see some of you. A lot of people off camera, but good to see your names. And glad to have this time with you. As Erin said, I went through the question document, some of the questions we didn't get to back in the fall, in December, and other questions that have come my way, and prepared just an informal Q&A. It's not a formal presentation, and we're also going to do a little activity in it, so you can be getting up and moving around and doing a little thinking as well. So I'll share screen so we can get to my slides here. So as a reminder, in the slide deck itself, which we will make available to you, mostly what you see is just the question and not the answer. So the recording is what will share the answer in a general. The first question that the team wanted to be sure that I got to was this one about success criteria. So it says in the update of Essential 1, defining success criteria is specifically cited. Can you provide some examples and teacher practices that would best support what research suggests? So to respond to that question, I first just wanted to say why it's an important question, or why do we think about success criteria in early literacy. First, although there's not a ton of research on this, it's reasonable to think that success criteria are good for teachers because they help teachers to think about what am I really after? And when you know what you're really after, that is what's really important to you in children's achievement in any given area, like what are they really looking for in a piece of writing, for example, that helps teachers to target their instruction, to target their feedback, to kind of keep the focus in the right place. And then we do have a reason from research to think that having a better understanding of what constitutes, and a more accurate, I guess, understanding of what constitutes success can be helpful to children in several ways. First, it can be more motivating to children, and just to take a walk down memory lane to expectancy value theory, but the idea that it's a fairly simplified theory, but useful for this context, that motivation is driven by your expectancy. That is, do you think you're going to be successful? And your value, do you think it's a valuable task? So when we set up valuable reading and writing and speaking and listening tasks in the classroom that children perceive as valuable or worthwhile, like having authentic audiences for their writing, for example, that's the value side of the expectancy value. But the expectancy side is kids thinking they're going to be successful. And it can be very hard for kids to think they're going to be successful if they don't know what successful means. Does that make sense? Like, then how would they know? And if it just sort of feels vague or random or capricious to them, what's success? That can undermine motivation. The second reason that success criteria can be good for children is because it can help focus their attention. So if you think of something like, the complex process of reading, we're going to dive more into this in a little bit, and reading fluency, there's so many different things you could think. You could think that being a good reader means reading the words correctly. You could think that being a good reader means that the reading sounds like when your mom reads. You could think that being a good reader means that you can talk about what you've read. Like, there's all these different possibilities, and you want to kind of convey the ones that matter to kids and not convey the ones that don't matter. For example, taking a pause to think about what you read is not a bad thing. So you want to make sure that children sort of recognize or come to understand and focus their attention on the things that really matter. Another example would just be, if kids are doing a really complex project where they could worry about everything from, handwriting to the accuracy of the sources they're using to the structure of their text, et cetera. What are the things that are really mattering to us this time? And then finally, it's good for children to have success criteria because it helps them really develop a better, firmer understanding of what constitutes, for example, good reading and writing. Okay, so I put together sort of some steps in this process that make sense, I think, around success criteria. So the first is, as an educator or as a team of educators, as a coach and educator pair, figuring out what really matters to you in a given piece of work. What are you really aiming for from children? And then step 2, can't get it to say, okay, has kind of 2 parts. Representing in some way what really matters to you. I think very commonly we use rubrics for that purpose. And then representing what really matters in a child-facing communication, right? So something that's friendly for you and something that's friendly for the child. And I'll show you a difference in a minute. And then there are 3 other steps that I want to get to after I show you what steps 1 and 2 might look like. So what I'm going to do is give you some examples. So just for a little context, this is a pretty, I'm going to start with writing, even though I know you've done a bit on success criteria for writing, just because I think it's more familiar and concrete, and then we're going to turn to reading. So for writing, the context here is that children are making bookmarks. Those bookmarks have informative explanatory text that the children are writing on them about the history of a game. So that's the sort of writing assignment. So for the part where the teacher is thinking about what really matters to the teacher, here is a rubric. So it's organized by, how much more support do I need to provide as a teacher to the child for the child to be successful with that, the success criteria for that particular piece of writing. And you can see that the priorities laid out here are the introduction, the events, the historical events of the development of that game, use of sequence words, and then some mechanical issues, spelling being pulled out as its own row, seen as really important here, and conventions, other conventions kind of lumped together. Now, I want you to notice a few things about this set of success criteria the teacher has developed. 1, again, the orientation is toward how much more do I need to do to help children be successful, not just putting all the onus on the kids. Then I want you to notice here that there's some relationship between what the teacher is valuing here and what's in the Common Core state standards, or in our case, the Michigan standards. So for example, to be really concrete, like down in the conventions, you'll see these are the things that we expect end of first grade. So there should be capitalization and punctuation, commas and lists, and conjunctions are, some of the foci in the standards for this grade. So it doesn't say, use of semicolons or use of commas, to separate major phrases, or, lots of other things. So we're just focusing on the things that, are heavily affected in standards. And then the third thing I want you to see here is the use of, a relationship between what's taught and what the success criteria are. So remember I said a value of success criteria is helping us as educators like focus. So if we put sequence words, if sequence words matter to us in this piece of first grade writing, you had better hope we are teaching sequence words. And if we're not teaching sequence words, we probably shouldn't have it in our rubric. In other words, those things should really go together. Okay, so this is like the teacher facing, document. But then, as I said, a next step is to look at whether this is a case where a child facing document may be helpful. So here's a child facing version of the same thing. So it's obviously, trimmed down considerably. And the focus is more like, do you have it? So, do you have an introduction? Do you have 3 events? Do you have your sequence words? And you may or may not, like how we did this, but I think we thought that developmentally, for where they were in the middle of first grade, this was a reasonable way to start focusing their attention as they work on and evaluate their piece of writing. We separate out, you can see there, the mechanics, the spelling is not in this same rubric. We've shown you over the years various rubrics for that. This one might ring a bell for those of you who've been around for a while, and these are available free on my website, nellkduke.org, in the inside information downloadables section. But this is an editing checklist for each grade level that's aligned with that grade level's standards. And so this is the first grade one that we have. So that would be the mechanics piece. So here we're just trying to get the child focusing on the success of their piece, the criteria for success for their piece, from a substantive and structural point of view. And then this is kind of a separate look at more of the mechanical point of view. So we go back to the slides. So here we have these examples of, really communicating to the teacher, oneself, and the child regarding what matters. Okay. Now, what I'd like to do is go through that process again, but this time I'm going to invite you to do it. And I'm going to focus on reading, where I think success criteria maybe are a little bit more difficult for people to conceptualize than in writing. So what I've done here is I have a link to I have a link to a document that is probably familiar to a lot of you, Dr. Tim Rosinski's fluency rubric. And there are other fluency rubrics out here. You certainly don't have to per se use this particular one in your own work, but for the purposes of this activity, this is the one we're going to use. So I've just put it in the chat. And I'm going to ask you now to work through steps 1, 2A, and 2B for this rubric. If you're by yourself, you'll be by yourself. I know some of you are in groups, so if you're in groups, you can work through it as a group. The idea is go through this rubric and think about what really matters to you. And you can imagine a specific scenario, maybe this month you're really, really working with kids on, just pace and accuracy. Or maybe this month you're really, really trying to work on phrasing and expression, whatever. Or you could imagine that you're trying to represent the whole of the fluency rubric. So go through and think about what really matters to you in this moment. You might think about a rewording. You might think these are too many steps. You might, think there's sort of different ways to say some of these things. So you would think about what is important to you and how you would create your own rubric. And then the next step is, how would you represent this to kids? And for the purposes of this activity, I'm going to say second graders. So you're not going to say to second graders, reads word by word in a monotone voice, right? So, what are some of the ways, either in a rubric or in I can statements, that you would communicate to second graders in a child-facing way? What would be success criteria for reading fluency? If you have any questions about the task, please put it in the chat. That's right, Beth. So after you figure out step 2, after you do step 2A, which is figuring out what you value, what really matters to you, then the next step is make a child-friendly version. It could be a rubric, could be I can statements, but how are you going to make it clear to a child what the success criteria are for that reading fluency? So what I'm going to do is give you about, let's say 10 minutes to work on this task. Feel free to get up and move around and think and ponder. And then what we're going to do is put in the chat some examples of child-friendly success criteria for fluency. So some of what you've written in child-friendly ways, we're going to share in the chat. Okay? Okay. So if you haven't, you all might want to download the chat. You click on at the very bottom of the chat screen where you see 3 little dots next to the smiley face. If you click on those 3 little dots, there's an option to save chat. And that'll give you, after the meeting in your Zoom, you'll have this so you can see all these wonderful examples. I can read like I talk. I can read without getting stuck too much and try to fix my mistakes. Love that. My voice goes up and down, gets loud and soft to show what a character feels. Jenny made a chart that you can click on. It's another reason to save this. And again, sorry if I'm not reading all of yours. They're coming in too fast for me to get them. I can read automatically by decoding unknown words in my mind before speaking them and self-correcting when they don't make sense. A lot of detail there. Okay, so I want to kind of thank you to everybody for engaging in this activity. So I just want to get really concrete again back to the rationale for success criteria. So if a child thinks that success is just getting through the text, just being done, if they're a kid who says, I'm done reading, I finished it, then they're not going to have motivation to do the repeated reading that we know is so valuable for kids, to keep working at that text, to get that expression improved, to get that higher degree of automaticity, etc. Okay, but if they think that the success criteria are the kinds of things you've been putting in the chat, and nobody put in the chat, I finished my reading, or I'm done, that, or got through the text. None of you put that, right? So your success criteria are different than what a lot of children might bring to the task. If they know that the success criteria are things you have here, then there's a reason to reread, right? There's a reason to practice reading, to get smoother, to get more automatic, to have more expression, etc. If they know that the success criteria are the things that you have in the chat, then there's motivation to pay attention to the meaning of the story or the text, as well as the decoding of it, because they need both to get the expression and to get that accuracy and smoothness that we're looking for. So do you see how the success criteria motivate a different set of experiences than the success criteria might motivate if the child just thought it was being done or finishing the text? So that's the power of success criteria. It really helps to create a set of priorities for you and for the children that motivate the right instructional practices for you or for the teachers you're working with, and that motivate the right set of experiences and practices for the kid. So that's the whole big idea there. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Okay. Oh, and we've still got great ideas coming in the chat. Was my reading like a robot? Love that. Very child-friendly way to talk about that issue of sort of, monotone and choppy versus, smooth and varied. Great. Okay. So back to the slides now. I just want to finish up with the other steps that I shared. So we really were just digging into these steps of figuring out what really matters to you in a given piece of work or a given, point in the year around fluency, for example, and then representing that in teacher-facing and child-facing rubrics. But there are 3 other steps here I just want to talk about, briefly. So one is just, we taking the time to really help children understand these success criteria. We also don't have to be, or the teachers you work with don't have to be the only arbiters of success. It can be really powerful to engage children in a conversation about what they think would be important to them in that piece of work. So if they're writing a poem, what do they think would make a good poem? What are the success criteria that they would like to suggest adding? And then when we share them with kids, lots of ways to do it, but, anchor charts are always a great strategy with, some pictures or other clues that will help children to be able to read and remember what's in those anchor charts. And then also, you've seen sort of more of a written rubric or a yes, not yet approach, which is another way to share success criteria with children. And then a key is just using those criteria repeatedly, right? So fluency is a great example. I mean, those criteria are going to be relevant for a long time. So you want to keep going back to them instead of kids feeling like, kind of digging into a set of criteria and then never seeing those same things again. Another example from writing is just, a good attention grabbing introduction is a success criteria in many, many writing projects that I've written because, that's just a key part of text, is a key part of standards. So, some of those success criteria to come up repeatedly. And so then obviously that I sort of previewed this already, but then you can build on those success criteria in the future. So maybe the next time I do a rubric, I'm using the same criterion for introduction, but I've replaced sequence words with linking words, or made some other kind of shift. So I'm kind of innovating on the criteria that I had. I did want to share with you, you remember from Essential Number 1, that research suggests that engaging children in goal setting can be really supportive of their development. And so this is an example of a goal setting sheet where the child is laying out a goal and taking notes on about the goal or their route to the goal. And there's this little box here, which is courtesy of Julie Emra, Michigan educator, where she, what kind of makes a good goal for the purposes of this goal setting, and then a place for kids to indicate if they've met the goal. And I want to share this because I want you to see the link between success criteria and goal setting. Right? These things are so tightly related because your goal that you have children set would likely be informed by and connected to success criteria you've gone over. So if you, for example, have worked on success criteria with children, or the teachers you work with have done that, where the emphasis has been reading with expression, then when there's goal setting, you could imagine a child's goal might be to read 3 Joni B. Jones books with expression, or to be able to read a book, record a reading of the book with no mistakes, or whatever the goal is. It's going to be likely related to the success criteria. Does that make sense? The connection there? Okay. All right. Moving on to other topics. Hopefully that was a little bit helpful in terms of how to operationalize those success criteria and connect them to goals. So this was not a question. I stuck this in myself, but I'm thinking it's February and March is right around the corner. And we have an article I don't think we've shared before with you, that Alessandra Ward and I wrote, called Every Month Should Be Reading Month. And it's about March is Reading Month. And I just wanted to quickly walk you through the article. And then I think MAISA is probably able to make it available to you, get it out from behind a paywall to share it with you. But for now, I just wanted to, somewhere in here. Oh my goodness. Okay, no, it's not somewhere in here. It's in here. 1 second. There we go. I just wanted to walk you through it briefly now, so you have that, whether you go on to read it or not. So I think you all know March is Reading Month is a huge thing all over the country. And, it's just there are so many organizations that get involved. It's all over the internet. It's all over social media. It's just a fixture in US schools. And I think, being against, sounding like I'm against March is Reading Month is kind of like me making it sound like, I'm against Halloween or something. I don't know. It's just like, it makes me seem grumpy. But I just want to explain, that even though it's well-intentioned and the idea is really to motivate reading, that there are some real problems with how March is Reading Month is usually operationalized. So in this article, we're not necessarily saying, don't have March is Reading Month, but we're asking people to do it quite differently if you do. So here are some of the key points. So I know a lot of you know this from the Essentials modules or elsewhere, but research does suggest that if you offer rewards for reading that are unrelated to reading, that is not proximal, not relating to reading, you can actually harm children's reading motivation over time. You can actually make them like reading less. So if you're involved as coaches with schools that are doing March is Reading Month, where the rewards are, the principal's going to kiss a pig, or the kids are going to get stickers or pizza or whatever, that's actually probably harmful to kids in the long term. So really wanting to rethink that. If they're going to be rewards, the rewards need to be related to reading. They get books. They get a chance to, invite an author to come and speak. They get a half an hour of extra reading time, where they get to read in partners, or something that makes reading seem like a positive thing for children. And you can also have no rewards, by the way. Just tracking how many books kids have read and celebrating that can be enough, that we don't need to have prizes for that. A second point we make in the article is that it matters what counts as reading. So when March's Reading Month is implemented, there often tends to be an overemphasis on books, sometimes to the point where what's getting counted is just books, and sometimes an overemphasis on fictional books. But we know that reading is valuable for children when it's informational text. We know that it's valuable for kids to read magazines and not just books, or lots of other kinds of texts that kids could be reading. So trying to broaden what counts in the March's Reading Month is what this section is about. This section is very related to some of what you talked about this morning, which is thinking about what texts are highlighted. So in the sort of classic March's Reading Month, Dr. Seuss is usually a major figure who's highlighted and whose work is highlighted. You see a lot of like Roald Dahl, sort of classic, usually white male authors are featured. And, we know why that's problematic. So making sure that your March's Reading Month celebration reflects the diversity of illustrators and authors and subjects of books that it should. And we give a little, idea here, just a list of some of the awards that are out there that really celebrate books by a diversity of authors and illustrators that you could use to think about some of the things that could be featured in the March's Reading Month. And then this section is sort of predictable, but, should we have just one month that's reading month? No, the whole year should be reading month, so to speak. And so we go into a little bit about that. And we just remind us of some of the things that we can do all year long to promote literacy. And these are very familiar to a lot of you, but feedback is really specific and timely feedback is really important. And that's something we've worked on, framing reading around knowledge goals, so what they're going to learn from the reading, that's really useful. Hopefully both of these criteria are reminding you of the topic of success criteria, all kind of interrelated there. Offering kids choice, offering opportunities for collaboration. We know how powerful partner reading or paired or dyad reading can be. Offering authentic tasks, so they're reading for some reason other than to get a sticker, and other than just because the teacher told them to. And then providing interesting texts that reflect the diversity of learners in your classroom is also a way to be motivating. So again, I'm hoping that MAISA might be able to get you access to the full article if you want to read it, but hopefully those are just some useful key points for you as coaches prepare the schools you work with to tackle March's Reading Month in a more modern and research informed way. All right, the next question. Dr. Duke, you can call me Nell, by the way, everybody. You spoke about supporting interdependent reading at our August meeting in Essential 3 revision. Added activities children can do while the child is working with small groups, but did not add or say independent reading. The examples you shared are supporting grades 2 to 5. I'm wondering if you could speak to what this might look and sound like in K1 while the teacher is working with small groups. Thank you. Sure, and I think you hit on some of this morning as well, so some of this may be just kind of review, but this is what it says in the 2023 edition of the Essentials. And I will talk about each one of these in relation to grade level to try to clear up a few misconceptions, I think, here. So in terms of writing, children in K1 definitely need time to be writing. It's really great for them to, for example, listen to the sounds and words and spell those sounds as best they can based on what they know to date. We have lots of research that estimating or temporary or invented spelling that children engage in can be really powerful for phonemic awareness development and for spelling development long term. So I would not say that writing is something we would hold off on for kids to be doing while the teacher is working with small groups until grades 2 to 5. I think in K1, we can have children writing for sure. In fact, I do a ton of work, and so do a number of other scholars on pre-K writing. So, kids can definitely be writing, and that can be in response to reading, or they can be looking at, say, a natural object and writing observations about that object, so that can be a content area connection. They can write questions that they want to ask a guest speaker who's coming in related to social studies. So this one can definitely happen, writing in K1. As needed, the key is explicit instruction for children in stretching out those words, listening for the sounds and representing them in spelling. Repeated reading or dyad reading, that's a great question, because most of the research on repeated reading and dyad reading is in grades 2 and above. But I don't believe we have any reason to think that repeated reading would not be helpful to children in K1. And in fact, I think we have pretty good reason to think it would be useful to kids in K1. And so that's something they could do as well. The key here is reading a book that they've already read with a teacher in small group. Okay, so something they've already had instruction in, had scaffolding in, saw improvement in. Repeatedly reading that is something that we can see happen in K1. And dyad reading, there is some PALS research that does involve children younger than second grade. So dyad reading is also an option, meaning paired or partner reading with a specific set of guidelines. And there is information about that in the Essential 3 module. Brief handwriting practice is actually, I would argue, more appropriate for K1. Really, we don't really need to be doing handwriting work in second grade, and except for children who have needs in that area specifically. We wouldn't do like whole class handwriting still in second grade, my opinion. And then in third grade, that brings up the big debate around cursive, but certainly print handwriting practice, again, is not something I would expect to even happen in grades 2 through 5. I would expect that to be focused on K and 1. So that's certainly something that can happen. Now, of course, it's not useful to children to engage in handwriting practice if they haven't had instruction first in how to form the letters correctly. And if they don't have, they haven't gotten instruction in grip, or there aren't grip supports they're using, if they have poor quality handwriting practice sheets, which a lot of the handwriting practice sheets you can download online are horrible from a handwriting development perspective. I could do a whole hour on handwriting. So if that's a topic that jazzes you up, let MAIA say no, we'll do a whole hour on it. But just basically, you want to make sure that handwriting practice is following explicit instruction in handwriting. Something I've been doing in some work with a big team is, this wouldn't work for you all because it's for a specific font, but we have little handwriting formation videos for the font we've developed so that children can actually play these videos as they're practicing writing the letters. And so that's another thing that could happen to provide some instruction. So I'm just making the caution here. Brief handwriting practice is great. Just want to make sure that it's following explicit instruction and not just kind of, kids practicing with no guidance ahead of time. And then I did want you to notice that we put the word brief here, like nearly every word in the essentials. That's not random. That wasn't capricious. Like, we were very thoughtful in putting that word. And that's because research does suggest that handwriting is better practiced in short bits and frequently as opposed to longer stretches less frequently. So in the What Works Clearinghouse Practice Guide on Developing Effective Elementary Writers, they actually say 5 to 8 repetitions of a letter in a sitting. So if they're writing the letter T, 5 to 8 T's, and then that's it. Move on to another letter. That's very different than what I see in many classrooms where it's like a page, sometimes more than one page of the same letter. That's not consistent with what the scientific panel suggested. Research-proven computer adaptive literacy programs. I believe that came up just today in your work together, which is great. And indeed, really nice meta-analysis out recently looking at computer adaptive literacy and math programs. And we do see, once again, that this can be a great tool for fostering literacy and math. They're not all created equal. Some work better than others. You want to look for the ones that have been tested in research and shown to be effective as your first go-to. And then finally, listening to and reading along with recorded books, I would also argue is actually more of a K1 thing, if anything. And there is some reason to think that will be supportive of children's development. Not just the reading along part, but also just listening to recorded books. There's some old research showing benefits, particularly for multilingual learners, of the opportunity of listening to recorded books. So my basic answer to the question that was posed is that I think all of these ideas actually can happen in K and 1 with careful structure. All right, so this is a long question. I'm just, rather than read it to you, I'm going to give you an opportunity to read it first. So I really appreciate the question and the opportunity to try to clear up a few things in responding to it. So think about the story, and what would make sense is, in my view, based on the research I'm aware of to this point in time, would not be a good clue or prompt to get children to identify a word. That would not be where we would use that. Where we would use that is after they've identified a word. If they have not read the word correctly, this would be a prompt to help them think about, this would be a good prompt to help them self-correct. So to give a overly simplistic example, but like if a story was about a group of people going up a mountain, and the child at some point read the word down for the word up, then you could say, think about the story. And would that make sense? So it wouldn't make sense that they'd be going down the mountain, and then the story is about going up the mountain, right? Like, so just after the fact, that would be a good prompt. But my understanding of the research to date is that wouldn't be a great prompt for just identifying a word in the first place. And I do have an article about this that I think you all have access to, called When Readers Get Stuck, that really makes in detail the case for why I'm saying what I'm saying. Next one, emergent readers working on looking at print, cross-checking first letter with picture. Again, I think most scholars, I believe at this time, would not recommend that. And the issue really is just that many children struggle to then get off of the idea of cross-checking with a picture. So rather than doing that when children are not ready for CVC, what you want to do is find other better ways to scaffold kids that keep them on track with decoding development. So that would be things like maybe they read the VC words in the book and you read the CVC words to them, modeling how to read those words. Or maybe you echo read the text with them while they track the print so that they are able to see those words and hear them. Or maybe you select certain CVC words that have more stretchable sounds and therefore are going to be a little bit easier for kids to blend in those early stages of blending. And those are the ones you prompt children to read, and you read the others. So they're just other better ways of supporting and scaffolding children who are not quite yet reading CVC words other than to prompt them to look at the picture. Third point, informational texts with graphs and charts are important for deeper comprehension. Yes, I agree with that. I think that's not a question as much as a statement, and I do agree with that. That's certainly lots of reason to think that lots of research to suggest that children need to have opportunities to read informational texts, and that graphs and charts and other graphics as well, for example, diagrams, are common in informational text. So they're a common and authentic feature of informational text. So if someone is telling you not to give kids informational texts that have graphs and charts, that would be, I would not know what research they would be drawing on to say that. And then the joy of reading a well-written and illustrated picture book fosters motivation and engagement. And I wasn't sure here if we're talking about reading, the child reading it, or reading it aloud. So reading aloud well-written and illustrated picture books to young children definitely has lots of research support behind it. And again, if somebody's saying don't read, I mean, we've covered this many times in the network, but if you're hearing any advice about not reading to children, that would be advice that is based on not science, based on some other thing that I don't know what it is. However, in terms of children reading well-written illustrated picture books, that really depends on where they are in their own development. If you're handing kids a well-written and illustrated picture book that they actually cannot read, then just sitting there with that book for a prolonged period of time, looking at the pictures or whatever, that I don't know of evidence to suggest that that would improve reading or even reading motivation and engagement. So, so it just really depends on how that particular piece is ranked. All right, 5 minutes. I better move along. Okay. Last question that I'm covering today. Dr. Duke, often when you join this network, you are able to share notable studies that have come out in the last year or so that you think people in literacy leadership roles should know about. Do you have any studies that come to mind today? What I did today is I picked 3 studies that have gotten a lot of chatter, like just a lot of people are talking about them, it seems like, on social media and in other forms. So that's what I picked today. And you'll get this slide, so you'll have these links. But I put links to these 2 and then a tweet. I guess that link's not live. I can add it to a third one. Okay, so one study that I linked to, the first one here, is a study. It's an evaluation out of Florida Center for Reading Research. It's right here. Is just the snapshot, and it's just really brief, 2 pages. So it's not the full write-up of the study, but may save you some time. But it's gotten a ton of conversation going on social media and elsewhere. And it's another study of the Heggerty phonemic awareness curriculum. And I've mentioned, made reference to other research on Heggerty. This one took a different approach where they compared schools that were comparable, but the schools that were using Heggerty, the schools that weren't, and the schools that were using Heggerty, the kids were no better off at the end of the year than the schools that were not using Heggerty. So that one got a lot of attention. The second one that I linked to is this one. Oh dear, I'll try to show it to you without rebooting. This is a study by Jimmy Kim at Harvard and a number of collaborators, as you can see here. And this was a study really of knowledge building. So it was looking at a 1st to 2nd grade intervention, a very large study, where kids were systematically building knowledge through thematically, or I might say conceptually related informational texts during the year and then over the summer months. So it's about a knowledge building or knowledge rich curriculum. And you can see the treatment group, even this very large scale study, the treatment group did surpass the comparison group by an effect size of 0.18. And I think more importantly, they did see transfer effects, meaning it wasn't just that the kids did better on passages on the topics they'd been studying, but actually on new topics. They had made them better readers to have this knowledge building orientation toward reading. And then the third and final study that I linked or put on this slide that, again, the slides will be shared with you, is this one, just a interesting study that got a lot of attention on social media around the relationship between empathy, cognitive empathy, and reading comprehension. So basically what they found is that it appears, certainly cognitive empathy and reading comprehension are very tightly related. It appears that when it is bi-directional. So when we help kids to learn to take perspectives, to do perspective taking, and to sort of put themselves in other people's shoes, that helps them be better comprehenders of written text, which is not really surprising if you think about understanding characters and characters' motivations and characters' states and so forth. But similarly, that the process of reading about the lives of others helps make you have higher cognitive empathy. So interesting study. Again, I'll add in the full link so that you can dig into it if you want to. But those are the three I picked to feature in our short time together today. I need to stop sharing screen, but how do I do it? There we go. Okay. I have a hard stop at noon because I have another meeting, but I appreciate everybody's attention and engagement and all that good thinking today around success criteria for reading fluency. And I just hope that you have a lovely rest of the day. Thanks, everybody.